Hello, everyone. It is time for Talk About It Tuesday. And today we are going to be talking about feedback in your writing. I may say a couple things that you haven't heard before in this talk, or I may share some ideas that maybe you've been taught differently, and that's totally okay. Um, I am hoping to offer some fresh perspective and some different ways of looking at feedback, maybe than what you're used to. So, I'm going to jump right in. The first thing I want you guys to know before we get into anything else is from my perspective, and this is one writer to another, this is an author coach to a writer. I want you to start looking at feedback as so often we think of feedback as grammar and typos. It's not. Real feedback is really about strengthening your writing. And so as we're talking about this today, I want you to remember that. I want you to remember that we're not talking about typos and grammar as much as we are talking about um, becoming stronger writers. And there's a lot of ways feedback helps us to do that. And I want to make sure that you're leaning in and really getting the most out of the feedback that you get from other people. So that misconception that it's about grammar and punctuation, there is one tiny part of feedback in the editing process that is about that. But the reality is that feedback helps you refine your craft, enhance your clarity, and like I said, it strengthens your writing and your skill. And the more you do it, the better you get. It's like a muscle. You work it out. So going through these processes and figuring out what works for you is strengthening that writing muscle in you. Editing, as we've talked about in a lot of different ways, and I've shared before, you'll have other videos on it if you want them. But there's multiple stages in editing. Each one has a specific role in shaping your manuscript into becoming the best version that it can be. So I'm going to share with you the process that I recommend to my clients. And I know that I always say one size doesn't fit all, and that is true in this case. But in this case, the process works. The details of what it looks like might be different from person to person. And I'm going to explain why I recommend it this way. And if there's a reason it doesn't work for you, that's totally okay. Let's talk about it and we'll find something that does. But um, there's a reason that I'm going to break it down the way I do. So the first thing you write is a rough draft, right? It's rough. It's going to be full of lots of things that are not really good writing. It's for some people, it's stream of consciousness. You're just getting your thoughts out there. You're putting it down on paper. For some people, it's just almost brainstorming in a way, and they're just putting ideas down. And here's a scene, and there's a scene, and we'll figure out how they go together later. That rough draft form is really important. But the part I want you to remember when you think about it is it's called a rough draft because it's rough. After your rough draft, you have a first draft. That first thing you write is not your first draft, it's your rough draft. And the goal of the writing process is to take it from a rough draft to a polished draft. We're going to take it from here and get it to here. And along that way, there's all these steps that we take in editing. And that's how we get it from rough to polished. So the first round is self-editing. You're not going to take that rough draft and submit that to someone else because it's not good. Let's be honest. Like you can be a really good writer and your rough draft's not good because that's not what it's meant to be. Good writers take it from rough to polished. So after you've done a few rounds of self-editing, you've got your rough draft, your first draft, maybe a second draft, you're feeling good. Then you want to reach out for the first round of feedback. And for that, you want to use peer critique partners. Um, I'm going to break down as we go through these steps a couple of things. I'm going to talk about who, I'm going to talk about when, and I'm going to talk about what. So I kind of touched on the when, but let's go over the who. Let's step back and do the who first. Peer critique partners are different than beta readers. Some people talk about alpha readers. You could call them that. I call them peer critique partners because of what I want them to do for me in my writing and what I want them to do for you in your writing. These are going to be people who are trusted colleagues in writing. They understand the craft of writing. It's not just your best friends or an English teacher, even, because yes, the English teachers understand how writing works, but they tend to teach more academic writing and essays, unless it's a creative writing teacher, then maybe. But generally, you're looking for another writer who has at least the same place in their writing as you are. So if you're unpublished and they're unpublished, that's okay. But if they haven't started their book yet, probably not going to give you a lot of good feedback. Um, and most writers who are unpublished have written other stuff before the point that they're at now. So it's not like just because they don't have a manuscript doesn't mean they don't have writing experience or writing backgrounds. But you want someone who's a trusted writing colleague. And ideally, if you can, you want them to be familiar with your genre. I write nonfiction, so having me peer critique your fiction book, well, it would work in my case because I love fiction. I read all the time. But for most people, you want them. So again, it doesn't mean they have to write it, but they have to be familiar with it. And I am familiar with fiction. Now, if you were writing middle grade mystery, I might not be a good peer critique partner because I don't know a whole lot about middle grade and what that looks like. But if you're writing, um, a rom-com, I could definitely do that, help you with that. So you're looking for people who are familiar with your genre, but the second part of that that often gets overlooked is you also want people to critique who are familiar with your audience. And I'm going to say this, it's really important. You have to know who your audience is first. You can't be writing a book for everyone. That will not sell because you can't be all things to all people. There will be people who do not like your book, and that should be what happens because it's not for them, and that's okay. You want peer critique partners who understand your audience. If your peer critique partner is 80 years old and she's never had children or grandchildren, she's never been around children, and you're writing YA fiction, she's probably not going to be a good peer critique partner for you because she has no understanding of that age group. If you're writing a women's devotional, you probably don't want a man to read it because it's not for him. So having an understanding of your audience is really important for your critique partner as well. So I already mentioned the when, after your first draft, before beta readers. And I'm going to explain why. Um, the reason why is because of what they're focusing on. You want peer critique partners who are going to help focus on developmental issues. Things like plot structure, pacing, if you're writing fiction, character arcs, if you're writing nonfiction, the organization, the clarity, your argumentation, all of that's going to play in for nonfiction. So you want these critique partners to be looking at that aspect of your writing. Um, you want detailed feedback on what's working and what's not working. If there's holes, if there's disconnect, if things are confusing or not resonating, that's what you want them to be telling you about. And the other thing that it is, the other what of it is it's a collaborative process. So it's an opportunity to exchange ideas with somebody. It's not just them answering a questionnaire for you and then you going about your day. It's actually having dialogue and talking through, okay, this is what worked and why it worked. This didn't really work. And you're doing it with someone who gets it, who understands the industry of writing. Um, and then once you get their feedback, you're going to go back into self-editing mode and you're going to go through some rounds. You're going to take their feedback. You're going to decide what works and doesn't work and make those changes. And then you're going to go through and I have a whole 8 stages of editing process that I'm happy to share with you guys that goes through what the self-editing phase looks like. But today we're talking about feedback, so I'm going to skip that part. Once you've gone through a few more drafts of editing, then you're ready for beta readers. This is after peer critique. And after several rounds of editing now, you've gone to at least 3 or 4 by this point. For me, it's more. It depends on your process. This is where it gets, customized to you as the writer and what you do. Um, so you want to do it when the manuscript is really pretty polished, not to the polished, shiny part that we're going for, but it's solid. You've gotten the developmental feedback. You've made all those changes. You've gone through it a couple times yourself, fixed the things that you know to fix as a writer. And now you're looking at a solid manuscript, but still has flexibility to change. So you can't be so dialed in that there's no margin, because if there's stuff that needs to be changed, you want to be able to do that. Who? And this is another thing I don't think people talk about enough. You don't want to just go get a beta reader who likes to read. You don't want to ask your best friends or um, you know, the ladies at church, whatever. You want to find a specific kind of person to be your beta reader. And these are not necessarily writers. In fact, probably shouldn't be writers, but if you have one in there, it's okay. But generally, what is more important at this point is that they are part of your target audience. Remember, we talked about that on the peer critique. Your target audience is who you're writing for. You want your beta readers to be the people who you want to buy your book. These are the people you're writing to. If you're writing YA fiction, you want some YA readers. And if you're writing that women's devotional, you want some women who love Jesus to read your devotional. If you're writing a devotional for new Christians, you don't want a woman who's been walking with Jesus for 40 years to read it because she's not going to notice when you use language that's confusing. You want a new Christian to read it because they're going to know, I don't know what that means when you say sanctification. Oh, yeah, that's a word I used. I didn't realize, you know. So it's important that they're your ideal reader because they're going to pick up on things that others won't. Um, and the other thing that's so unique about this, when you get those people who are in your target audience, they read the book the way your future readers will read the book. They don't read it as, oh, this is my friend's book. Oh, I like the writing. They read it actually as a participant, as an active reader. So you get different feedback from that than you do from another author. The focus of beta reading is not about developmental editing. That will come up, it will, but you're not going to use that word because readers don't really follow that whole process. It's not about grammar still. It's not about spelling. You should have fixed most of that by this point, but there's still little slip-ups. If they tell you about it, great, but that's not the objective. The objective at this point is to get a reader's perspective. That's really what you're going for. Um, you want to know if your story, message, theme is engaging. Did they want to keep going? When I did my beta readers on my first book, at the end of every chapter, I had questions for them. And one of my questions was, do you want to keep reading? Because if at some point they don't, I need to know that. Um, are there confusing or boring sections? If you're writing fiction, that'll show you that you have a pacing problem. If they're like, you know, I don't yeah, I'm bored. You want to know that. I was talking to someone earlier today, and she shared about, she had a reader for one of her pieces who has ADHD. And she had asked that particular reader, hey, let me know if there's parts that are boring for you or there are parts where I lose you. And the reader was like, yep, you can cut this and you can cut this and you can cut this. That's a unique kind of feedback that only an audience type reader is going to be able to provide for you. And the benefit of all of it is that it provides insight into what resonates with the readers and what needs clarification. So you can fix the clarification and you don't touch the stuff that's resonating. That's really important as we go through moving into like rounds 5 and 6 of self-editing. We don't want to change the things that are working, and we can't know if they're working unless we've gotten some feedback. Um, I love to share here that like, I don't want to say this. Um, this is a great way to get some marketing material. If you have beta readers, ask them to put a heart by things that they loved or a smiley face by things that made them laugh or smile. Because if they do that, you know what's resonating. That's a little key cue to you that this resonated with them. Um, and those little snippets can actually be marketing tools for you down the road. You can pull that quote out that made them chuckle, or you can use that line that made them think. So if you want to get that feedback from them, not just I liked it, but like what did you like, what specifically? And for most readers, if they just have a pen out while they're going and you tell them to draw a heart or make a face or whatever, that will help them to not get step away to like give you feedback without having to step away from the story itself. So just a little side note on how you can use some of that feedback as well. So you're gonna get all that back. You're gonna go through, you're gonna do another couple rounds of self-editing, cleaning up. I always recommend, and this is more about self-editing, but I always recommend once you go through a couple of rounds of each level of feedback to read the manuscript through from start to finish clean. Um, there's going to be little changes that you make that make something not work, or so you're not going to catch that on just a quick pass. And so I always, before it goes to peer critique, I read through it front to back. Before it goes to beta readers, I read through it front to back. Um, and then I can usually catch some of those little things before it goes to them, and just give a little bit cleaner copy. So that's my process. That may not be for you. That's okay. The final feedback you get is the professional editing. Um, and when I say final feedback, you may have multiple rounds of beta readers, depending on how rough your copy is or how much you end up changing from the peer critique. That's okay. Like if you want to do multiple rounds with critique or beta readers, that's entirely up to you. That's your process. I'm just giving you the kind of the three mains. So peer critique, beta readers. Now we're on professional editing. Um, this is like this is a manuscript you feel really confident about at this point. You've done the work. You know you've made it the best that you can be on your own, and now you're ready to say, okay, I need a professional. Um, so when it's as close as you can get it on your own, that's when you're ready for professional editing. After you've done those other things I've talked about, though, because if you're just doing the part on your own, you're going to end up spending more money on your editor because there's going to be a lot more back and forth rounds if you skip the peer critique and beta readers. So, who? Professional editing should be done by trained professionals with experience in editing your type of manuscript. Um, that's really important. There are a lot of editors out there online that I've seen in social media groups and things like that who advertise their editing, and they don't have genre specific. I do all books. You really need someone to edit who understands your genre, even though it's copy editing, you're in that kind of final step. Um, you really want somebody who knows your genre, the nuances of it. Capitalization, like if you're writing a nonfiction book, and it's faith-based, do you capitalize the word biblical? Do you capitalize the word scripture? You want an editor who knows that and is going to help you because you probably don't know that. There are style guides that are used in the industry that matter. You can't just do a Google search, do I capitalize the word scripture? Because you're going to get 100 different answers that say yes, some say no, some say it's up to you. And that's not correct. There's actually style guides that tell us how to write a book. And so your editor is going to be familiar with those style guides and help you with those things. There's three main types of professional editing, technically four, but we're going to talk about three. Developmental editor, that's the big picture structure, pacing, flow. I think if you have really strong critique partners, that can be addressed with your critique partners. With fiction, this is my little disclaimer, with fiction especially, if it's your first book, if you haven't taken the courses and you haven't done the learning on character arcs and plotting and pacing and all of those things, if you don't know that intuitively, if you haven't studied it and learned it, and now it's part of who you are as a writer, you definitely probably want to hire a developmental editor for your first book. Um, so that's developmental editing. Copy editing, and this is the part that I'm talking about at this last stage, really where you're at. Developmental editing would come a little earlier in the process. Copy editing is your sentence structure, your grammar, and your word usage. Word usage. This to me is a must-have. Every writer, I don't care how many times you've written a book, how many times you've gone over it, there's things you miss. I'm going to give you a real life example from me. I just launched my first discussion guide last month. Super excited. Sold the first 10 or 11 copies of it, and mine came, and I was flipping through it, and I had made a change. It wasn't a typo. It was a different kind of mistake. I had made a change on a scripture verse, and I had left the book of the Bible next to the second book of the Bible, so it had two books of the Bible with a chapter and a verse. How many times did I go over this manuscript? A million. And those are the things that will help with having a copy editor. I did not use a copy editor for that book. There's a whole nother story why. Never do that. It's usually my recommendation, but there are some exceptions, and mine was an exception. So copy editing to me is a must-have. And they're going to be checking all of the grammar, the punctuation. Um, there's a lot of detail in all of it, and they're going to help you find that. The final type of professional editing you might use at the very end, this is after your book is formatted, is a proofreader. Um, I can't say this enough. Proofreading is done after your book is formatted. Their job is to check for formatting issues. That's what proofreading is. You can't proofread if you don't have a proof. A proof copy is the one you order that is almost ready to go live. And then you go through it and you look for orphans and widows, and you look for weird page breaks and line breaks. And they might catch a last minute typo or something too, but really their focus is on the formatting and making sure that everything is still laid out the way it needs to be, and that things didn't get compressed or a font changed in the middle of the book because technology does stuff weird. So that's proofreading. Um, you can do that yourself if you're comfortable with it, if you know what to look for in design. If you did the formatting yourself, I would not do it yourself. I would have somebody else look at it. Um, so again, this is beta readers, peer critiques, beta readers, professional editing. Um, and I'm just trying to think if there's anything else. That proofreading, I want to go back to it because it confuses a lot of people. They think editing and proofreading is the same thing, and it's really not. I promise it's not. Your copy editor should not be your proofreader. Your proofreader should be somebody who's never looked at your manuscript before. That could be a family or a friend or something like that too, where they're just going through and looking for mistakes in the way it's laid out. If they know what they're looking for and they have some experience in that. They're cleaning up and eliminating any like post like pre-production errors. Um, anyone with a strong eye to detail and a working knowledge of the industry can do that for you. I do want to talk really quick on professional editing about cost. It definitely varies by editor and service, but there is a standard range of what you can expect to spend. Developmental editing is the most expensive. That's one of the reasons I teach self-editing so religiously, is because I think you can actually learn to do a lot of this stuff on your own through self-editing and with the outline of what we just talked about with the peer critiques and the beta readers. Um, but for developmental editing, you're looking at 3 to 9 cents a word. It's definitely the priciest. Copy editing, that's the one everybody needs to have, is generally 2 to 5 cents a word. Sometimes you can find it for 1 cent a word. There are some random editors out there who charge by the hour still. I'd be hesitant with that because you don't want them rushing through it. You also don't want them like dragging it out, whereas the word count is kind of more the industry standard. So I think that's the better way to go. And if you hire a proofreader, that's the cheapest one. It's 1 to 3 cents a word. And so if your manuscript's, 50,000 words, they're going to charge you, whether it be $500. Yeah. Uh, sorry, I'm trying to math. So yeah, so they're going to charge you $500 and they're going to go through and proofread it for you. I Again, I do think that's something that you can have help with that is a favor or a friend doing you a favor. Um, so for budgeting, this is my little pro tip. Budget for your editing from the start. If you know you're writing a novel and you think it's going to be 80,000 words, budget 5 cents a word for copy editing from day one and start saving it up while you're writing. Start putting that money aside. It's a really critical investment in your book's success. I love reading indie authors. This is a little shout out to self-published people for a second. I love reading indie authors, but it's really hard to find good ones. And I will not buy a self-published book, and I do look at that without doing the look inside or the free download, and I will read it and make sure that it's been edited because I'm not going to spend my money on a book that hasn't been edited. If it's not worth your time and your resources, why should it be worth mine? I feel very strongly about that as a reader. And I just want you to keep that in mind. It's important and it matters. Okay, wrapping up with a couple of key takeaways for you. Editing is this layered process where you're building. Each stage builds on the one before it. So you rough draft, self-edit, peer critique, and you're just building the story so you have this beautiful palace when you're done. Collaboration is key. Um, if you're like me when you were younger and you dreamed of being a writer, you picture a cabin in the woods and like a typewriter or maybe a pen and a notepad and writing it all out longhand. And you had this like vision of it just being this beautiful romanticized idea of what writing is. And the reality of it is writing is collaborative. Um, Peer critiques and beta readers are really crucial steps in professional editing. So don't be a one woman or one man. Well, don't be a one woman show. I don't really have men who follow me. Okay. And then the last takeaway that I want you to leave with today, I'm going to go back to the beginning. It's not about grammar. It's not about punctuation. It's about strengthening your skill as a writer. It's about storytelling, clarity, audience connection. That's a big part of getting feedback is how am I connecting with an audience? If you're the only one looking at it, you cannot know that. It's not just fixing commas. Okay. So I want you to take a minute here and reflect on where you are in your editing process. I want you to think about what steps you might be skipping or rushing. And then I'm going to challenge you to make a commitment to view editing as craft development and not just a search for typos. Okay. It's a big ask, I know. But that's what I want you to do. I want you to reframe the way you look at editing. And, you're welcome to share with me in the comments where you're at in the process and what steps you feel like you've been rushing. And if you need help navigating any of this, I'm absolutely here to help you with that as well. And um, I'm just excited because I know that if you can take and apply these things to your writing process, you are going to come out so much stronger at the end. That finished, polished version is just going to be unbelievably solid. So, all right. That's everything for this Talk About It Tuesday, and I look forward to our next one.